Mackenzie. Hey, this is Owen. Don't forget to like our show and subscribe.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love and Kindness Project Foundation. What is one thing that you could do to think, speak, or act kindly today? Go to loveandkindnessproject.org to learn more. Before we begin this podcast, if you or someone you know is in crisis or needs emotional support, there are tools that can help. So get yourself a pen and paper or open a note-taking app on your phone or computer. Feel free to pause this episode while you get yourself ready. The episode starts at 1 minute and 6 seconds. You can call Talk Suicide Canada at 1-833-456-4566. You can text 45645, which is coming in the fall of 2023. In Canada, you can also call 988, the Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868. The Trans Lifeline in Canada is 1-877-330-6366. And in the United States, 1-877-565-8860. Or call 911. You are not alone, and you do not have to be alone. I would like to honor and recognize the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo nations on whose territory I live, work, and play. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family Podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets, and I am passionate about removing barriers for others through creating connections and building on strengths and practical problem solving. I am married to Siobhan, a parent to 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. And now, into the episode. So the other day I was on the couch and I was listening to my AirPods. I went to get up, go do something else. Got distracted, went to do other things. I was about to go to bed and I realized, I should listen to such and such video, and I went to look for my AirPods. Couldn't find them. So as I began to look for the AirPods, I looked in the usual places like the fridge, the freezer, pants, the car, the kids' room. I seriously could not remember where I put them. I eventually found them the next day. They had fallen into a basket that was beside her. And honestly, I feel ripped off. Why couldn't I have found them in the freezer or the oven or in the garbage? Why couldn't they have been in a place that was weird and unusual, not just in the basket? Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing fantastic and are looking forward to my conversation with Jeff. Just a quick programming note. Unfortunately, Jeff realized that he was late for a meeting when we were doing our recording, and we ended up having to cut our conversation short. But we're going to talk again because it was a heck of a lot of fun. It's not often that you hear 2 guys, talking about what scares them and, where we feel vulnerable. The entire conversation is going to be available if you're a subscriber. I do want to quickly note that this is going to be my first content warning. Both our kids' journeys into the world wasn't easy. And if you want to skip over that section, just go to 13 minutes or so, and you'll have missed that part. My guest today is Jeff Borschowa, and Jeff and I met through a health podcast collective, and you've heard him on the previous episode that we were doing for our show. And I thought I'd just give a little brief overview of just kind of what's going on here. So Jeff knows, and the audience sort of knows. We had some thunderstorms roll through last night, and there's a possibility that they may appear again today. So if all of a sudden I jump and I'm like, you're going to know why, because I'm not expecting thunder and the blinds behind me are closed. And also, Jeff introduced me to another, I'm just going to say, mutual friend / acquaintance, which was Stephanie Escoto. And we just recorded a podcast episode together, and that went super awesome. And that whole episode is centered all around creativity. And that was a heck of a lot of fun. So I was excited by it. And it's been fun to get to know Jeff. And I didn't realize how similar our journeys was. So the whole point of our episode today is to talk about really just have a conversation as two parents, two dads, and just sort of comparing our journeys and seeing where things are different. And wherever this goes, this goes. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing. I know full well it's never going to go the direction we plan on, but I think we'll find the journey is fun, anyways.
Oh, definitely. So I think it'd be good to just establish the beginnings of everything. So for you, now I know you have two kids, if I can remember correctly, um, and our kids are both similar in ages. But when things started, like I want to go back just to the beginning before they were born or as they were born. Did was any of this on your radar as far as any of it goes?
Absolutely not. And I think it's interesting because as my boys grow, I start to see more and more of me in them, and I guess honestly, I knew I was different. I just didn't know, I've never been formally diagnosed in terms of, I haven't sat down and completed diagnostics, but, I knew that I was different from other people. It honestly, we were just hoping for a, healthy baby, and, we wanted to get through the pregnancy, and, I guess we'll meet this little person when we meet them. um, it wasn't probably until our oldest was 4 or 5 that I started to realize, these odd characteristics I had were also in him as well.
Mm, that's interesting. Was I'm curious because I know for our journey for the kids being born, the was your how do I'm trying to come up with a good way to phrase this. Was from the point up until birth, was that a smooth process or did you guys have challenges too, I guess?
Um, our first son, his pregnancy was completely uneventful right up until the moment of his birth. He had a fetal stroke and he was stillborn.
Oh,
So
wow.
he created a lot of drama right at the end, and I think it was just sort of, he's fine, he's very well adapted, and things like that. Um, I think he saved it all, scared the hell out of us for a week, and then since then he's 14 now, and he's healthy and happy, and um, he's very, very resilient. He hasn't been sick a day in his life almost since birth, but
Wow.
you know, there were 3 minutes where the doctors called him and they were about to stop resuscitation. So, yeah, we had no idea. And then our second child's, um, his was a very odd pregnancy. The doctors misdiagnosed a lot of things. They actually wanted us to terminate the pregnancy, and we decided that we couldn't and wouldn't. It was just there's a whole bunch of different things, and the irony is a lot of the testing could only be done after the fact, after
Mhm.
the point of no return, and we had to sort of accept that it is what it is. We'll deal
Yeah.
with whatever happens in the end, and happy to report that most of the things they were worried about never came to pass.
Hmm.
Very grateful that we were stubborn enough to fight for him, because the world would be a much worse place without him in it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me and us, like my wife and I, the journey for our son being born, like our daughter was our daughter was smooth. It was everything was sort of scheduled, and I mean, the first time you go through birth, you're not going to know. You don't know sort of what you're going to expect or whatnot, and the process of Owen being born was that was hard. We ended up nearly losing him twice. And I haven't mentioned this or done an episode or anything on this part of it. The first time was a misdiagnosed miscarriage. And the second time was the emergency C-section, and we didn't realize the cord was wrapped around his neck. So that whole experience of, it deeply changed everything, the way that I look at pregnancy and everything else. And to me, pregnancy is very much about women's health, and anybody who doesn't see it, just we need to do so much more. We did. I just think
Yeah.
we're so behind in that regards. But I feel like you and I are pretty much on the same page as far as that goes. But it's interesting to sit there and have that, because there's that sort of terror you have of, especially because we're not the ones pregnant, like you and I. I mean, we don't have that. We are, the only thing that we can do is advocate. And like, I remember when Owen was born, my wife had lost a lot of blood, and she was out of it. She was sick, and that was scary, because I was in the recovery room with Owen holding him, and she's getting stitched up, and I think they were giving her infusions or whatever it was, but that moment of just, what the hell's going on, and you don't know, is terrifying for us. And we're not the ones being operated on, and it's like, what do you do now? It's scary. Um, there's sort of the first lesson in being an advocate too, half the time. You're thrown
Well,
into this
and
because
honestly,
you
Mark,
don't know what to ask. You don't
yeah,
know what to ask.
you just get comfortable being there and asking whatever. Like, I can empathize and relate, because with my oldest son, his cord wrapped around, and they don't know if that triggered the stroke or if
Mm.
it was just coincidence. But we went from me, my wife, and a couple of nurses and a doctor. All of a sudden, there's 30 people in the room shouting at each other and telling each other what to do. And I'm just like, what do I do? Where do I stand? Like,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It, I mean, this is a dark humor sort of story, but I mean, I look and I laugh at it. The After Owen had come out of Siobhan, and they had, he was screaming and crying. It was awesome moment. I loved it. I loved hearing his little voice. And the nurse the nurse had told me to, like, okay, well, we're gonna go weigh him now. We're gonna go over to this part. And she goes, I want you to look down and follow the line. I can't remember what color the line was, but you're going to follow the line. And we're going to go to this room, and I don't want you to look over here. And the over here she meant was over at Siobhan, because she was open, because it was a C-section. So,
Yeah.
just look down and just walk through. And I'm just sitting there going, I told the nurse, I'm like, are you afraid I'm going to pass out because of the blood? and and she's like, pretty much. And I'm like, oh no, trust me, I'm good now. Because you've gone through so much stuff and you've seen this. Is like, no, I'm pretty much fine with it now at this point. And it ended up being the case. So yeah, I actually didn't end up looking over there. I just went over and dealt with him. But I laugh at that moment of just being told to look down, and I'm like, no, I'm okay, I'm good. Um,
And
the
that's the thing. I mean, you don't know what to do. Like, there's no guide. And,
No,
I'm not going to say this right, but, I grew up on a farm, and, birth was just a natural part of life. And, there's that once a year pregnancy where you lost some livestock, and you just kind
yeah,
of assume that nature knows what to do. But then when you get into the complexities of human reproduction and human birth, there's nobody sits you down and says, hey, here's what to expect. It's just,
yeah,
you show up, and you're like, all hell breaks loose, and you're like, okay, you know how do we rebuild this? And had some time where my wife, they weren't sure if she was going to make it. And my first worry was, how do I tell her, if we lost the child? And then I'm like, wait a minute, what if I lose her?
yeah,
And it's amazing how all of that can go through your mind in seconds.
yeah,
It was,
yeah,
if you look at the clock, it was probably 3 minutes from drama to everything sort of calmed down.
Yeah.
But you had a lot of time to think in those 3 minutes. So
Here is a 20-second kindness break.
Here's a tip for thinking kindly. Reframe your thought process that kindness is hard work. It's not. It's just a different kind of work.
Check out loveandkindnessproject.org and find other ways to carry out kind acts or start a kindness project of your own.
Jumping a little bit ahead, well, somewhat ahead, when you were noticing in the kids the differences, like, you know, your, like, seeing your traits and characteristics come through in them, what was your path? Did you guys go for a private diagnosis? Like, not even the private public diagnosis route, but what was your first stop to sit there and say, hey, you know, um, so and so person says this is what we should look for? Like, what was the first sort of step in that?
it was probably, I'm going to credit my wife because I think, we figured it out together, but she
Mhm.
was the one to have the ideas, the thoughts, the comments, and honestly, she noticed things that were different that just seemed normal to me because that's who I was.
Mhm.
But really, it was just observing little things and putting the pieces together. And it never once occurred to me that my particular superpower is obsessive compulsive disorder. The big thing we learned was, never leave the house without snacks for the kids. Because cranky kids are easily
Mhm.
unregulated. Never leave the house without having, some plan for the kids' nap time. It just amazes us when we go out in public and, somebody's kid is melting down because they're clearly hungry, thirsty, or sleepy. We just tackled the obvious things right from the get-go. My wife is amazing at planning. So, we had go bags with, all kinds of snacks and things for the kids. We planned our life around their naps and if we needed to be somewhere, we made sure they got their naps in. But the biggest lesson for us was learning that the boys are more like me than we had anticipated. And by the way, it's kind of been a gift that I can translate the world for them.
Mhm.
But the biggest thing we realized is that our kids need structure and they need a plan. And so we never leave the house. And again, I'll credit my wife with this. We never leave the house without telling the kids, even when they were babies, here's what we're doing. Just don't freak out. But the big thing is we always give them, and by the way, this is probably good parenting just as a general lesson. Um, Kids with OCD don't change gears very well. So we always give them a heads up and say, hey, in 10 minutes, we're going to do this. And really, it was just observation that when you say to, when my oldest was 4, we'd say, come on, let's go, we're leaving. And he'd dig in his heels. And, you've not met someone more stubborn than a 4-year-old with OCD being dragged away from whatever he was doing. Um, and what we realized was there was this pattern, and that's where I think I came in. I'm really good at spotting patterns. My wife was really good at spotting solutions. And we
Mhm.
just recognized that as long as we give them that heads up, hey, Mark, we're going to leave in 10 minutes,
Yeah.
um, magically, a lot of the difficulties went away.
Hmm.
So
Funny.
we never actually, and this is something now we're dealing with. We've never formally bothered with a diagnosis um, because with my kids, I can relate to most of the challenges they have. They're overly stimulated by light. They're overly stimulated by noise. You want to make them miserable, put them in a room full of loud kids for a few hours.
With
The
bright
public
lights.
school, yeah. And just for fun, every now and then ring a big loud bell. It's kind of what we realized was that elementary school was designed to drive my boys to that
Yeah.
point of triggering. And really just I've learned over the years, here's some things that worked for me. So we've had some really candid conversations, and I'll say, hey, here's what worked for me. Do you want to try it? And they say, well, I tried it and it didn't work, but I tried this and it did work. And the interesting thing is they're like me, but they are not exactly like me. So we've adapted different strategies for my oldest that work for him, different strategies. And, my youngest, we have two things that work well. He needs earplugs when he's at school just to down the noise. But the other thing is, once a month at least, he's got to have a day where he doesn't go to school.
Mm.
So we're just learning as we go. And, I think it's just, we're lucky enough that we can communicate well with the kids. I speak their language because,
Yeah.
whenever something triggers them, we give it a label. We call it something. My oldest has a thing with germs, and, as a family, when he says I've got the heebie-jeebies, we know to back off. So
Yeah.
it's just having labels.
Yeah. And I mean the nice thing about having the labels and the names to call something, or at least to attempt to call something what it is that number one, you're calling it what it is, but you're also validating. And that is, I mean, those two things are, I think those two things are hugely powerful. And it's interesting because the question that came into my mind when you were talking, oh, don't do this to me, brain, was there's the ADHD. As soon as I open my mouth, there you go. Um, uh, Nope, I'm gonna come back to it. I know the question will come back, but it was cool. And it would have been a super interesting question, but I'll zero in on the other thought I had was the relationship between you and your wife, how you sort of had that pattern spotting side thing, she had the solution side down. When before the kids came along, is that how you guys were together? Or did is this part I know where I was going to go with this, and I'm going to write it down this time too. Um oh, it just left. Damn it. Anyways, sorry. But is that how you guys were before this, or is that something that happened as you went along? Parenting advice, that's what it was. Now I remember what the thought was. Every single time that I get asked, do you have any advice for a new parent or something like that? Typically I say no. like don't read the books. They're just wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we figure like you said, figure things out as you go sort of thing, but there's no there love your kid. Like love your kid, learn and let them be the path that is going to make you guys like a stronger bond more than anything else. Um, but that was the thing I was gonna bring up was about that one. When people offer that parenting advice and it drives me nuts. Or read this book or read What to Expect When You're Expecting. I'm like, I'm gonna use that as far. What are you kidding? Um, the So, like, were you and your wife's relationship, were you guys like this before the kids came along, or did this develop during that time?
I'm going to give you a weird answer, and I'm going to say both. The short answer is my wife has always been the planner, and I've always been the guy who figures out what happens when the plan doesn't work. So I'm more the adapter, and we both have different strengths. But for the first couple of years, I'm going to be honest, if it was left up to me, I'd be out and the kid would be hungry and I'd be like, oh, what can we get at Walmart or something? I'm not that organized. I forget the diaper bag at home, and I've more than once had to go buy diapers while I was out because the baby needed to be changed. Um, but the reality is, and back to your point about parenting advice, um, I don't give advice because all I can say is my kids are the most fascinating subject on the planet to me. And so I've spent all this time studying them. And, we joked when our first was born and when our second was born that, they didn't read the books, so they didn't know how they're supposed to behave. So why would we read the
There's a
book and
book.
exactly. So why would we expect them to have read the book and understand? So, we just realized, and I think this is important, kids, even though they look alike and they might act alike and they might sound alike, they're still going to be, because that was the thing. Our oldest, we had 4 years of working with him. He was really gentle with us and he was kind and he kind of gave us a lot of patience when we needed it. But all the things that calmed down number one did not work on number two. All the favorite TV shows, nope, he doesn't like that. The favorite toys, they were and frustrating because they looked alike, they sounded alike, but man, they were at the heart very different. And it was just one of those things we kind of early on we just let go and said, we started from a place, both of them, we were so grateful to have them. We let them figure out how they needed to be and we adapted with them. And I'd like to say we have a really, really good relationship where we've talked things through. Even, our boys didn't have tantrums like many other kids. Again, if there was a triggering moment, it was just up to us to be detectives and say, okay, remove hunger. Okay, done. Remove thirst. Done. Okay, let's have a nap. Okay, what else is there? It's just, but that's my big advice is just be curious about your kids and find out what they need, because one way or another they're hardwired to tell us what they need. We just need to be listening and advocating.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's the sort of the downside of the behavior, right? Or behaviorism in general, and that is we miss the cues of what are all the little things that add up to that moment of whether it's extreme anger, happiness, sadness, whatever. What are all those things that are going on? And I mean, you say the same thing that I do. Is I always give credit to my wife because she was the one that picked up on so much of this stuff, and I was just, and I remember the moments where she's like, You should try this, honey," and and she does, and I laugh because she doesn't remember, and I'm like, no, I mean, it made an impression to say the least. So she tends to always I tend to always sort of give her the credit because it's darn well due. And I just know for us, it was it was interesting because I think the way that it, like after the hospital and everything happened that did, I thought, okay, that's the worst of it. Our son's born and we're gonna start life and figure things out. And
Yeah.
well, no, then other things started to happen. You don't realize that things are connected not until later. And
Yeah.
so I know I have said this before, especially on the podcast, but I'm forever grateful to our speech pathologist who we were seeing at the time when Owen was 4, and it was just like she spotted all these things and that was the answer right there. It's like, oh, and that started the more research side of things. And there was never so much a case of denial for us, but it's more like this is explaining what we're going through. This is what it is. But I have I really appreciate the way that the way that my wife would talk to me and we would work through things together because I wasn't like I remember I showed you the fishbone diagram that I came up
Yeah.
with, which is probably a explanation I'll put at the start of the podcast to tell people what it is. But I wasn't making that problem solving tool connection to parenting until I took that class, right? Owen would have been 2.5, 3, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't until 2016, 2017, and that's when I started to connect those dots. It's like, oh, this could be really useful here. But that's where the solution part of me really kicked in. And as soon as Siobhan would say something, then my mind began to fracture off into the myriad of possibilities it could be. And then you just start working through it. The hard part was that she just can't keep up with my brain.
Yeah.
And that is where a lot of what I do, a lot of the talking and stuff, it's like, okay, you need to slow down and take a minute. And yeah, I think it was a cool process that way, because you begin to realize that you're helping your kid in the way that is natural sort of to you, and you're exploring that curiosity comes through as it's natural to you, just like you guys did. We did a very similar thing. It sounds like it doesn't sound that different, honestly.
One thing I want to point out for those who haven't watched our other conversations is, you and I both had skill sets in our job that we were really good at. And
Yeah.
I'm a coach. So one of the things I'm looking for is, behavior reaction. I'm always looking and reading people. And it was just one day I was like, I had this hat that, here's Jeff the dad. And then, okay, here's Jeff the coach. And one day I had this moment of, what if I was just Jeff? And
Mm.
I started coaching my kids, and I started applying the lessons I've learned from my kids into my coaching. Um, I'm a better human being. And I can say, as an entrepreneur, I became much, much better once I realized that, I have skills that apply to all areas of my life. And, so I teach my kids things. We have conversations. I'm passionate about training, so I'm always spending time. And it was just the aha moment. I'd spend this time training a client. Why wouldn't I spend the same time training my kid?
Yeah.
And I'm a systems guy in my job and in my business. So why wouldn't I bring systems into the house and teach my kids these systems?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you can use those systems to sit there and guide certain things that are going on. Um, I laugh because when you're talking about that, I had a flashback to all the sticky notes I had on my wall of doing a process map of trying to get out, how do we get Owen to bed?
Exactly. And
It's
if
really
that's
funny.
what helps you, go with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's the other thing too. It's like, I mean, we talk about, not wanting to give parenting advice, but honest to God, it's just more, it's not even parenting advice. It's more like self-advice of, if you've got a way of figuring something out, go with it.
Yeah.
Don't feel ashamed or weird or compare yourself to somebody else. None of us have got this figured out.
Yeah.
Like none of us do. Um
The funny thing, Mark, is I don't solve anything in my professional life without a whiteboard. And somehow I tried to parent without my whiteboard. And I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you, Jeff? Like, sorry for anybody who's offended for language, but the moment was, if this is how I solve problems, and by the way, my wife doesn't use a whiteboard. She thinks that's strange. So we tried to default to her thing. But the reality is, if you think about kids, they only have so many reasons they cry. And
yeah,
if you can create a system to eliminate the big three or the big five, life with a kid is easier. And I'm not saying easy, but it's easier. And whether your kids have big demands or little demands, most kids need to deal with, food coming in, food going out,
mm,
um, you know, liquid in, liquid out, and, awake or sleep. If you solve the big ones once and standardize it,
yeah.
um, we had a bedtime ritual, we had a bath time ritual. Like, rituals were important to our kids, and we only figured it out by observing them and test and measure. So
Well, and I think the ritual thing is interesting because, people would tell us, all the advice that we got was like, oh, why don't you give him a bath with this calming stuff beforehand? And I'm like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
The
He didn't
ritual
read the
of
memo.
no, he doesn't. He didn't read the memo, and it's like when we got advice like that, that's when we're just like we were getting sick of it, and
Yeah.
because it's just everywhere. Um, so then here's okay. So did you ever feel how do I want to say, did you ever feel left out? But I don't mean left out in terms of the relationship between you and your wife. But what I mean is when, like, feeling left out in terms of the process of people always giving your wife advice, people always looking at, your child, like you're sort of kind of left to the side almost. Um,
I would
did
say
that
a
ever
lot.
a lot?
And I'm going to be honest, I don't really bother and worry too much about other people's feelings. If I need to be part of a conversation, um, my wife and I have had this agreement since the day we met. I'm broad shouldered. I can take a lot of weight. I can, hold a conversation. I let her do what she needs to do, but whenever she needs me in a conversation, my job is to make the space for us both to be there.
Mm,
Lots of people, and this I did find fascinating. It's kind of like they'd separate her from the herd so they could give her that, quiet advice, and I'd be the one to pull her back into the room and say, "What the hell are you talking about?"
yeah.
So, it's my wife is not shy by any stretch, but there were times when she people would should upon her, they'd should all over her, and I'd just step in and say, you might want to consider stepping back because
Yeah. Yeah.
Mama Bear needs her space and you're about to trigger something, so back up. But
You're concerned for their safety.
yeah, this isn't about me. It's not about her. This is for your own safety. You might want to take 10 steps backwards. And, yeah, a
But
lot of people like to give advice that's unsolicited. And that would be my one big piece of advice is ask
don't.
somebody if they want your advice before you offer it, because,
Yeah.
especially when you deal with pregnancy and postpartum, that advice might be returned up your backside with a shoe. So just
Yep. Yeah.
think
So
carefully how important it is to give that advice.
that the thing that you said about, like, your role is to make that space, for you guys. Was that something that was there pre-kids, or was that something that developed through the kids?
It's something we've definitely consciously cultivated since we've had kids, but
Mm.
it was always there. I am a huge advocate and supporter for my wife in any way, shape, or form. So anybody who makes her life difficult, they get to deal with me. And that's just our partnership. And by the way, trust me, she can handle her own. It's just every now and then somebody needs to hear a little louder voice saying back up. But that's the thing with my kids. I've known from day one, they're helpless, they're small. Nobody's going to advocate for them unless I do.
Yeah.
So I owe it to them to be as big as they need me to be to protect them and to
Yeah.
advocate for them. So
Yeah, it's nuts. I think this having that space, and I don't think either you or I are not saying that we're trying to speak for our significant others or something like that. It's, I mean, number one, sort of figuring out where we fit in the process to begin
yeah,
with. Um, but
exactly.
number two, I think there's a difference in the distinction that you or I make versus someone who is trying to speak for that person that I think gets the bad sort of reputation, whereas we're trying to, amplify and let that person's voice be heard.
Yeah.
And I mean, with me and my wife, it bugs it bugs her because I will sort of try and do that kind of thing. Like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Because I'm going to sit there and open my mouth, and then what happens when I do that, honey, is that you're probably going to get what you want, which is fine. But I sometimes do struggle to be subtle.
Yeah.
No,
Well, and honestly, Mark,
I'm
we have
working on it.
signals for that.
What's that?
We have signals. I always joke, do you need the nudge or do you need the nuclear option? Because I got both.
Yeah, pretty much. Whereas I
And
don't know.
she lets me know when she wants the nuclear option, and we reserve that for the worst case scenarios. But
Yeah. Was okay. Is there a funny story or a moment where you just like where you said, "This is parenting," or like, "I've arrived. This is parent. This is what it means to be a parent."
I think the biggest thing, we used to joke this was not in the manual. I think the big thing for me, and I won't get too graphic, but um, when you have kids, they have amazing aim when it comes to projectiles, whether it's coming out of their mouth or their backside. I think the moment for me was my youngest. He was really not feeling well. We didn't know he was sick, but he was riding around on my shoulders, and he threw up on my head, and it just went everywhere. And we were in a store, and this poor teenage girl who was working the night shift by herself, she's like, "Do you want a hand towel?" And I'm like, "Seriously, a bucket is needed here, not a hand towel." Like, it was just, and we get in the car and go home, and it's like, this is love, when
Yeah,
you're like, worried about the kid, not the fact that, there's
you're covered in
food
whatever.
in your
Yeah.
ears and whatever. So it's not
Well,
glamorous, but
yeah.
we love our kids, and we enjoy them. And I think that's what I would say to everybody is, your kids are going to be unique. Enjoy and embrace that unique.
The I know what it was for I know what it was for Mackenzie. For Owen, it was a much more subtler moment. But you know what? When you've been peed, pooped, and puked on, I mean, that's just in the worst of times. That's just the what's it called? That's just it. I know for me, it was the moment I had when Owen. It was the moment after it. Was the next day. Must have been yeah, it was the next day. My parents had come to the hospital, and I had a big, huge red beard on, and because I'd grown a baby beard for him for like a year and something, and I'm never gonna do that again. By the way, the I like my face without facial hair now, much more. So, anyways, I could tell Owen wasn't happy with it, and my mom took this picture, and it's in my head, and you can see the look on his little newborn face of being a couple days old, and he's just like this, and I know he's looking at me, and I'm just
Yeah.
looking down at him with lots of love, but I can see the expression being like, "You might only be a couple of days, but you don't like this beard at all, do you? Who is this weird guy?"
I
And
am
so
the boss.
I and it was funny. It was a really funny thing. With Mackenzie, it was a far more it was a far more obvious moment where we're in the doctor's office a couple days again, like a week after or two that she was born, and they were gonna check her out. And I think I had handed her to the doctor, or Siobhan did, and she had no clothes on or anything. We had her in the football pose, which is putting your arm, putting the center of your child across your arm and just cradling like a football, so to speak. And
Yeah.
her butt became a shotgun. And that was it. It went straight across. I'm going to have to edit this stuff out, but it's just funny. It went straight across the room, and it was just like, that's my daughter. And
There you
so
go.
I felt a moment of proudness. Well, hey there, subscriber. It's just Mark now. Unfortunately, Jeff realized that he was late for a meeting, but we're going to chat again at some point because that was a heck of a lot of fun. I really do like diving into people's origins and comparing them to ours. It's not about seeing who had the better story or the more gruesome story, but it's more knowing that you're not the only one that went through some tough stuff. And quite honestly, how often is it that you hear two guys talking about this kind of stuff and how scared we were? It was a lot of fun, and wherever you are, be safe, be awesome, keep on being you, and remember, you are enough.
Thank you for listening to our show.
If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD family.
See you soon for a new episode. I have 3 things to ask of you. Number 1, if you have any comments, questions, or guest ideas, please leave a comment on the Facebook page. Number 2, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people find us. And number 3, if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated. Any medical information on this site and podcast is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for a professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or guidance about a specific medical condition. The show, host, and its guests expressly disclaim responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or show. By visiting this site and listening to this show, you agree to the terms and conditions, which may from time to time change or be supplemented by the show host.